Ladies and gentlemen, so we resume our presentation, and I happen to be the last one. Quite serious issues have been raised by our previous celebrated speakers, and I want to start off with something lighter. So, though I will be talking about socio-economic issues of British Pakistani community, so that is my general theme, and I will be particularly raising the issue of women and burqa, which is quite hot and topical these days because of recent ban on burqa in France. So there is kind of a debate over here as well. So rather than straight away talking about that issue, I just wanted to ask how to cure your headache. I can see a lot of doctors here. So migraine and other forms of headache. So you have your own remedies and cures. In this African community, they have also got a cure. Okay, this continues for quite long, so I'll just use a small bit of it. My question, when of course it was shared by some of our friends on Facebook as a piece of humor, but I am rather taking it a bit more seriously. It's a case study. And I'm raising the question, why we laugh when we watch this? Why do we laugh? Yeah, Kevin?
It's not something which is very prevalent.
Not in our normal life.
Yeah, it's something.
Not feel it in normal life.
Yes.
The sound effect is quite.
Yes, also.
And you're not even sure whether this has been done for whatever reason is.
Yeah. But if this continues, and so we laughed. We found it quite irrational and silly thing to do. But more important question is, why what we can so obviously see silly shouldn't be done, still being done? And why this man who is suffering is ready to continue with this suffering?
Take this a norm for them, maybe that's how they treat headache in their culture.
It's conditioning that he has seen somebody else, and it becomes part of the versatile therapy. The next time he won't say he's got a headache because the pain associated with it shame. So the next time he won't say I've got headaches. That's what.
Great. Perhaps before I start trying to explain what is happening here, I would like to invoke two concepts here which are quite central to all literature, whether on management sciences, organizational studies, sociology, economics, political science. You find these are central ideas: control and power. So control is the ability to achieve what is desired. And I often, in my classroom, I use this to explain this idea, that you are sitting in this vehicle, and that vehicle is kind of that organization that you want to reach somewhere. So you have a destination, finish it. So your ability to keep it on the road so that you end up where you want to go, that is control, that faculty, that ability. But in order to have that capability, you need certain gadgets, you need certain power devices, and that's power. So that ability to achieve control, that is through power. And like I'm just showing here, you have remote control, you can control TV, in the car, you have brake, you have steering wheel, so you control the vehicle. Same thing is happening here. This is an organization. A community is also an organization. And I'm using this small organization as a case study here. So we have one power wielder, somebody who is enjoying that power. And that comes through a lot of other control mechanisms, social controls that we usually categorize them. Then another group which is legitimacy provider. So there must be another group which legitimizes the power of that power wielder. And the third one is, of course, the sufferer, the one who is suffering, and as rightly explained by our friend here and also friend there, that it gets conditioned. And why this conditioning takes place? Because all of them, all the three, are connected by chain of common faith. And when I use the word faith, I'm not just using it in its religious connotation, religious meaning. Faith source can be anything. Organizations, they do have faith systems. They have some norms and taken for granted beliefs. The source can be nationalism. Nazism was a faith system, but it wasn't religion based. We have cultures, cultural faith. So any source, but one is common, that all of them are linked inside that faith chain. And that kind of takes away the ability of the sufferer to do introspection and see what we can see, because we are seeing it outside this faith system. Just, I am inviting you to think how many sufferings we all undergo, different sections of our society undergo, because nobody can question that faith which is holding everything together. So this brings me to this very important idea to understand. What we see is behavior, and we don't like it. Like Tahmina in her presentation and Anwar also pointed at certain behaviors which are unacceptable, and those are being challenged. The problem is behavior itself is driven by a mindset. Unless you challenge that mindset, it's very difficult to change that behavior. And the mindset in turn is driven by those commonly shared beliefs and faith systems. So unless you challenge those beliefs, you can't change the mindset. And if you can't change the mindset, you can't change the behavior. So we can't simply change behavior of the actors by simply tackling behavior issues. We have to go to what is driving that behavior, mindset. And in order to change the mindset, at times we are forced to challenge certain beliefs which are the basis of that mindset. And that's how faith and behavior are interlinked. Now I'm showing you a data of a research paper about minority ethnic students in universities taking their degrees. It's 2003, but still very relevant. And what you see here, this is the Indian community. That, us, Pakistan. You can see the wide gulf. The difference in terms of interest in higher education. Another one. Why I'm showing? Because data speaks louder than words. And I'm more interested in data rather than making speeches. This is, I have taken it from Department of Education own report, latest one. And it's about GCSE accomplishment, A star to C grades. And this line is the national average line for whole UK. And these are Chinese and Indian students, their achievements, above average. And here we are. We were below average in the recent survey, and we were below average if we look at the 2003 average line. So we are not making progress. We are not achieving even the average performance. We remain below average. While our similar communities, it's not that since we come from a developing country, that's the reason. India and China, they are outperforming us. So these are the issues that really strike me. And this is something I'm sharing with you. One of our friends recently visited UK, and he took these pictures and posted them on our site and said, this is what I see my Pakistan in UK. Now, that's the backdrop. That what are the issues that we should be discussing, that we should be alarmed, our discourse. But what is the discourse? Burqa. We should be allowed to wear burqa. Dress code. So this is what our discourse is being consumed by. And that's, for me, is alarming. That we are not discussing the real issues. Now, if I try to make a categorization of the arguments that often are presented in favor of this right, so I see a continuum ranging from this is ordained by faith, so I'm wearing burqa because this is part of my faith. And on the other extreme, we have human right argument as well, activist argument that it's a freedom of choice. If anybody wants to wear, who are you to tell them not to wear or ban it outrightly? So the main argument fluctuates between these two extremes. I'll first address the faith argument, that if faith is the basis, so where do we draw our faith from? Holy Quran? So that's kind of the main source. And certain verses are quoted that that's the basis and that's why we have been ordained, we have been directed. So if that is sincerity, if really they are following faith is the issue. I find this verse also in the Holy Quran. What it's telling us, whatever you have in excess, distribute it among the needy. So you can't keep anything which is in excess. You have 4 cars, keep 1 car, distribute the rest. So that's Kulilif order given in Quran. We have this another verse where receiving or giving riba interest on loan has been declared equal to war against Almighty and His Prophet. Such a clear admonition. We don't find it in the case of parda or in the case of dress code, but we do find such a clear directive regarding interest. But we don't find same kind of prohibition. They have all kind of rational excuses why they are still engaging in riba or interest-based banking. But when it comes to women, that's where they are not flexible. That's where no literal meaning we have to follow. So in reality, it's more a cultural norm emanating from alpha male mentality, and where divinity and this divine symbolism is only used to ensure voluntary compliance from our female section of the society. Now, often in these discussions, sometimes it is mentioned that you see even among Christian nuns, they wear kind of a dress code. So if they are following, why can't we? I find a difference here. One, I think dress is always a statement of your mind. It's more than a dress. And when I see a nun wearing a dress code, I find a statement that it's a withdrawal from worldly pleasures. That's what she's telling me. And it's dedication to charitable work. So I read these statements. And I then also see most of them busy working in charitable work. So if I had seen my women folk wearing these dress codes, burqa, and they had devoted their life to charitable work, I did not have any issue. They have made the statement and they are devoting their lives. They are very respectable for me. But I never see that. In their other life, they are as pursuing worldly pleasures and worldly pursuits as any other woman is doing. So the statement is not about dedication to charitable work. It's more about submission to the control of their menfolk. So is the second main argument, which is about human right argument. So do women really wear burqa as a matter of personal choice? That's what we often come across. So my main question is, why does a suicide bomber wear the suicide jacket? It's just personal choice if he's doing it. Who are we to stop him? Why many Hindu women willingly accepted sati? Many of them, they would go of their own accord. They were ready to do that because they were conditioned like that. And disgraceful widowhood in the past mainly, I'm not saying it's happening today. And why Chinese women practiced the barbaric norm of foot binding. We are aware of the other two mostly, but most of us are not aware of this ritual. It's 10th century Chinese social norm where the feet of young girls, even less than 6-year-old, they were wrapped so that and broken so that they were not allowed to grow. So they remained very small in size. And why? Because the social norm was that women should not be seen as working. And since they have small feet, they can't work. So it was a social norm and prestige of those days. And women suffered for centuries. Then state intervened, it was banned, and when the communist regime came, it really forced the banning of this socially accepted norm. So this brings the crucial question of role of state. That what is the role of state? Is state just a bystander? No. State owes its existence because of a social contract. So it is there to provide security. It is there if it sees that certain sections of the society are being discriminated or deprived, it must intervene and restore the balance. That's the purpose of the state. So, and I give one example of 1890 when British ruled India. At that time, an incident took place that a 10-year-old Hindu girl, she died, she was a 10-year-old bride because of internal bleeding. And the colonial government, it raised the age from 10 to 12, minimum age for marriage. And there was huge outcry. And both Hindu and Muslim religious and communal leaders of those times, they got together that this is our religious and our cultural right. It's who are you to tell us when to marry? but state has to intervene. Then I also like example of Charles Napier, the conqueror of Sindh. Though, of course, he is depicted in history in different ways, but I'm just using one which I liked, that in 1843, when he became the first governor of Sindh, he received a complaint from some Hindu priest about sati ritual, that this is our cultural norm, why you are enforcing it so strictly. I liked his reply. And that's what I draw my inspiration from. That be it so, this burning of widows is your custom, prepare the funeral pyre. But my nation has also a custom. When men burn women alive, we hang them and confiscate all their property. My carpenters shall therefore erect gibbets on which to hang all concerned when the widow is consumed. Let us all act according to national customs. So if some section of society are enforcing burqa on their women folk, the state has a responsibility to intervene and rescue that section of society. So it can't remain just a bystander. So what my conclusion here is that wearing burqa is not a free choice, as often presented by our human rights activists at times, but rather it's a cruel mobile cage imposed by man. But the question can be raised, then why do women comply if it's such a bad thing? And that takes us back to that original video clip, that lot of us suffer because we can't question the power wielders and the legitimacy providers. So it's threat of religious symbolism and threat of excommunication, that culturally you can be considered as an outcast. Another economic activity argument is also important for me, and I take it at two bases. One is at gender-based disparity, that within the community, economic opportunities, they depend on the way you think, the way you act, the way you dress. That has a lot of bearing on your economic activity. And if burqa is imposed, so that means that a lot of avenues for economic activities are shut on you. So you no more remain an active economic agent, and thus you are dependent on menfolk for your living. Now, at wider community issue, humans are not just humans, they're independent, that we make personal choices. We are also economic agents. And if members of other communities are using 100% of their human resource for development, and we are just using part of our human resource, we can never compete with them. So we will always lag behind. So even at that level, if we don't like Israel, if we don't like this country, this one, that one, fine. But if you want to compete with them, then if you are already economically lagging behind, you need to utilize all your resources, and human resource is the most important resource. But half of that you make it inactive, so how can you ever achieve that level of economic growth which is required to compete with other communities? And I've already shown you the data that where do we stand when even with our own similar communities we compare ourselves. Mindset argument, as I mentioned in the beginning, that burqa is not just a dress, it is also a declaration, a statement that men and women can't have equal opportunities to excel in life. It's a declaration that woman is a sex object and her main value is provision of sexual services. That's why she has to be covered. And she's vulnerable. She's considered to be weak and hence should remain covered so that others can't take advantage of her. So it's that mindset that needs to be challenged. And in this society, if the core values of the society are different, so this mindset cannot be allowed to prevail here. Even if all these arguments can't prevail, the security threat argument, recent pictures from Pakistan, militants dressed as women in burqa, luckily caught, but how would we, if something happens here, we will ever identify who did it if the terrorist is wearing a burqa? Then the last of all, where I bring everything together, is this fake complacency. We are complacent about whatever we are doing. Of course, I like the idea that we should present the good image, the positive aspects of our culture. We should retain those and we should project them. But at times, if we overdo that, we can have this fake, we can become complacent with ourselves. And this has a bearing. A very seminal article by Cotter, published in Harvard Business Review in 2007. It's about change management. And he lists main factors which are responsible for failures of most of change management initiatives. The literature tells us about 70% change initiatives, they fail. So he tried to list down what are the main factors. And top of all of them is lack of sense of urgency. So if members of that organization, they are happy, they feel proud, nothing is wrong, you can't bring any change there. You have to create that sense of urgency. There is a problem. And when everybody embraces that problem, only then you can bring in change. So by this symbolism that since you are wearing burqa, you are wearing this dress code, you are nearer to God, so we are the chosen ones, so and so that kind of creates a fake sense of complacency. And then we don't look at the other data, that where are we standing. So it's important to challenge that. And I want to change this even in Pakistan, there. But when I see that even here the situation is not much different in certain pockets of our society, so that is kind of a very nerve-wracking for me. So what kind of woman should be our role model? I want women or men, both. They should be those who are always there to chase the butterflies of their dreams, and nothing should come in their way. If she wants to be a fighter pilot, we should create opportunities for her to become one. If she wants to be at the top of Mount Everest, her brother should be there to support her dreams and take her there. And if she wants to be a celebrated sports personality, let her become one. So these should be the role model for our women. So whose responsibility is this? I believe it's joint responsibility. Of course, state alone can't do this. State has a big responsibility. Through law and administrative action, it should restore the balance. But at the same time, I think greater responsibility lies with us, community, through awareness, through the work of Tahmina, Anwar, and my friends over there, who in their respective, at organizational level as well as at personal level, they are all doing their bit. And that's how to make the community aware of its human rights and other important issues. So when both state and community will work together, only then I see a real change happening. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions or any comments?
Yes, please.
You can add health issues as well, vitamin D, metabolism, and that. I think that's crickets and this very.
Great. So that's what perhaps the doctors or our other experts who are working in science, they can contribute that information that even in health sector, our community has a lot of problems, and we are complacent about that.
This paper that mental health and accessing services is such an impediment, covering is such an impediment, that even our responses, the health staff has a different view of them, that we know where to tell them, what not to ask them. So it comes with a kind of baggage when you see someone. So I think that's bound to create some more barriers rather than lower barriers.
I really like your presentation. It was very thorough.
Thank you.
Well, I actually have one question.
You sure?
The way you explained it through the faith, if you look at historically, maybe going a few centuries, even Indian women who were not Muslim, and they belong to different faith, they don't show their faces to their husband's older brother even today. In Middle Eastern culture, I think because of this robbing of caravans or looting, coverage was a security precaution because you don't want your women to be picked up, and usually when everybody's wearing burqas, it's very difficult to distinguish between the young one or old one's chances of. So there was a lot of reasons, but the main reason really was women were considered property until very recently. We don't like to think this, but that was the case even in the most enlightened nations, so-called UK or whatever else, 1920, whenever they were actually recognized as a person. So I think any laws or any hopes that suddenly things are going to disappear is not going to happen. I think the one can happen is male people, not really women, us, need to grow up and let our families, our sisters, wives, are actually given them their right and make them really exercise their right. And until we do it, we will be here 300 years later, same discussion.
Maybe it will get worse.
I think you have made very pertinent point, a valid one, and I have you explained the background of certain norms. So every norm that we practice today has some historical background. And as rightly said, that even other cultures did have some sort of issues with gender discrimination. If you look at the European countries, the Western ones, sometimes I pointed out that in even Shakespeare stage dramas, women were not allowed, or at least it wasn't considered appropriate for women to act on stage. So therefore, young boys would perform women roles. Or Romeo and Juliet. So Juliet ages 13 and she's admonished that you are 13 and still not married. So now, according to our laws, if she marries, so that will not be permissible, because the social law is expression of social consensus, and that social consensus changes in due course of time. So now social consensus is that no, we cannot discriminate against one section against the other, either on basis of ethnicity or on the basis of gender or any other basis. So if that is the social consensus, then that should be expressed by the state, that we cannot allow. Yes, I am full agreement with you that only if the state passes a law and we continue thinking like we think, nothing will change. So it's the joint responsibility, and I think the community's responsibility is far greater than the state, that we need to change the way we think in those blind alleys of our thinking. So we need to come out of that.
But burqa is black color mostly, because Afghans, quite a few refugees came here. So they changed from the traditional blue color to black. So it was the Arabization of even the Afghans who came here. If you look at the traditional Afghan woman wears a blue, sky blue. So when she comes here, I've never seen anyone wearing a blue burqa, which is normally seen.
Yeah, so it's kind of this intermingling of culture and kind of this new propagation of faith. If it is Saudi Arabia propagated faith brand, yeah, so then they will scale it up, scale it down. You see all different interpretations. So at the end of the day, it is, if you have to address a bit of that faith issue as well, because that has an impact on the behavior. So perhaps maybe
I just
you
wanted to say
please.
something,
Yeah.
because we're talking, I mean, the discussion is revolving around probably the history and the norms of South Asia and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And we can understand that those regions do, even to now because of conflict, being on the cusp of, for example, the Northwest Frontier, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, it's on very on the cusp of all these territories where invaders were always invading those regions, and they had to, the only way to protect their women was to cover them up, because they are still, and even to this day, they're considered as chattels. But when we can't really compare then what's happening over there to what's happening here, because the women in this country, I do believe, are, in the majority of cases, are taking up the burqa out of free will, and they're doing it as an act of devotion. And I can't see any comparison with, the Sati comparison, because I don't think anybody's being endangered or nobody's life is being endangered. All I can possibly see is that possibly in terms of security risk and the lack of integration, I mean, I can see that it is a kind of a barrier. But on all other, they're able to work, they are able to work.
Well, when I give example of Sati, I'm not saying that they both are equal in terms of magnitude. What I'm saying is the how your beliefs, they condition your thinking. So why would a woman, many of them, they would volunteer to be burnt alive, many of them. It's not just that they were forced, because they were conditioned that your husband has died, there is no life. So they
there are cases here, for example, where their husbands aren't very religious, they're not that pious, but the women themselves are choosing to wear the burqa.
Yeah, so that's where...
That's convert women from non-Muslim families.
That's true. That's what I'm saying. That's where faith is coming in. That they have been conditioned that this is their salvation. That's how they will be rewarded in the afterlife, something like that. So why we are allowing that kind of discourse to deprive a section of our society to give up their fundamental right? Is something serious happening here?
But are they? That's the debatable. I mean, I can understand in Pakistan or Afghanistan they're giving up their agency because it's proven. But in this country, have they actually had the women here given up agency?
So why youngsters here are becoming, are volunteering to go to Syria and other become kind of militants here? What's their problem? In Pakistan, you can always say because they come from poorer sections. What's the problem here that they voluntarily they go for that route? It's indoctrination, whether it is taking up arms or giving up your fundamental human right. It is indoctrination. So the phenomenon is same. The youngster takes up arms because of the same indoctrination, and the woman gives up her fundamental right because of the same indoctrination. So perhaps I'm concerned about the both consequences.
Suggest you take more contribution to the floor, then allow
Okay,
yes, please.
Just going to very quickly go back to some of the points you made earlier. I'm a careers advisor, so I work in schools and in communities, and I've also worked with Women's Aid in my local community, so I've come across quite a wide variety of the sector, not just Pakistanis, but generally a lot of young girls and women. What I see, especially your point about the GCSEs and education, is a lot of the young girls who I come across, they can be in a normal comprehensive school, so they can be in a mixed comprehensive school, but as soon as they hit their GCSEs, 16, they suddenly either disappear, so they're either taken back to Pakistan for a variety of reasons, not necessarily forced marriage, but that can be one of them. Or they would just disappear into their communities, and we will then see them surface a year or two later, and wanting to look for work but actually have no qualifications or have very little qualifications. And the mindset, going back to again what you were saying earlier on, within the families, within the community, they've been brought up as your future is X, Y, and Z. There is nothing beyond that. I dealt with a young girl who wanted to be a model, for instance. A very big no-no. You know, that wasn't going to happen. She was being persuaded to go towards business studies, you know, very conservative, very classical sort of. And it was like, no, she wants to do something else. So her only choice was to either do as she was being told or be excommunicated, you know. And that, is quite a hefty punishment for wanting to have free will, for wanting to have choice.
I've been hiring for many, many years. I have not seen a single burqa or niqab girl come in front of me to ask me for a management job. And there is a deprivation of opportunity, if you like it or not. I've not seen one. I've seen many other Pakistani girls or Indians or other. Not seen one who said, yeah, I'm already done my Harvard degree or LSE. I don't want this. I've not seen it.
There's a whole load of stuff that's been conflated here and kind of put into one big pot, and it might just be where you want to resolve problems or resolve issues. Just unpick what we're talking about here and what the issues are. I think one of the most depressing things I've found in my time in Pakistan, speaking to human rights campaigners and women's rights campaigners, is the increasing presence of the burqa on university campuses, in the centre of Karachi and Lahore, increasingly Islamabad. And the burqa has always been present in the tribal regions for the safety and the cultural issues, and it's essentially an element of not even Arab culture but tribal culture around safety, and from whether it's conflict or kidnapping or I personally just am very, very anti the burqa. I recognise, however, that people are entitled to wear what they want to wear, but I find I'm uncomfortable around it, but I certainly wouldn't advocate a ban. I think it's damaging in its increase in Pakistan, and there's absolutely no doubt that that has limited women's presence in Pakistan. And when you speak to people that spend a lot of time in India, when you speak to NGO workers that travel between Delhi and Lahore or Karachi or Mumbai, the first thing they say is it's just shocking how much more presence there is of Indian women in open society than Pakistani women. And that's a recent development actually. In the 60s and 70s, certainly in the cities, it was not like that. It wasn't perfect, but it was not like that. There's also the issue around education and the issue, and this is relevant to both countries. So one of the UN indicators on a child's life chances is a child's life chances are heavily increased if they're the child of an educated mother, boy or girl. And by not educating half your population, it's a huge debilitating thing for a country or a community in both countries. I think the issues in the UK are slightly different in that I think the difficulty here is whilst you have to defend the right of someone to wear the burqa or fully cover themselves, you've also got to ask about the consequential impacts on other girls in that community and peer pressure. And I've spoken to headmasters in countless schools where there have been campaigns by Hizb ut-Tahrir to get this girl's human rights demand that she should wear the full hijab or whatever, and it then puts pressure on other girls. And other girls find themselves limited, and then you start pressurising on access to other school activities or curricular activities, and you actually start sexualising girls really early when they shouldn't even be thinking about sex or sexual identity or gender. They should be thinking about play and fitness and growth and growing the mind, etc. So I think, but the context is different because you have to, for better or worse, deal with an element of people demanding a right that may actually impact on other people's rights. Whereas in Pakistan, it's enforcement, in my view. And it's depressing when, you know, young, incredibly talented, bright women that I know in Pakistan have to put it on for safety when they're getting the bus home, working from the newspapers and TV studios that I work in, and the sexual harassment and the groping culture and all the stuff that goes with lack of safety in public spaces. I don't think it connects to Syria and young boys going to fight in Syria, however misguided or foolish or idiotic that is, because I think that's a much more muddled set of issues. Because essentially, that's the consequence of allies of the West and Britain, which are the Gulf states, that have launched an utter demonisation of Shias and Ahmadis and Sufis and Barelvis, and the mindset of our allies actually coming out to play in Britain as well. So, you know, there's a bit of a double standard there, in a way, that, you know, they're only doing what our allies and our trading partners are doing. So, you know, I condemn them, you know, but I think there's a contradiction there in how we as a country and our allies and our relationships. But I mean, fundamentally, yeah, I think the burqa is not a great thing, but I think you do need to separate the contexts in both countries.
Any further questions?
For a Muslim woman who wears a hijab or a burqa, it's okay to judge me and say to me, you are such a nice person, you're doing great work, but only if you start wearing a headscarf, then you, mashallah, you know, a perfect woman. But I cannot say to that person, you know, if you take your hijab off, you, because that might be my view, but I'm not allowed to express my view, because if I were to express my view, that person would be highly offended. But most people I come across from the Pakistani Muslim community, they would just say to you, why are you wearing, you know, nail paint? Remove it or don't enter the mosque. But I can't say to them, if they're coming to my event, well, you can't come to my event, you know, dressed like this, or etc. etc. So what's the way forward? How can we change that?
Yeah, well, it's a difficult calling, as I mentioned that behavior is controlled by mindset, and mindset is controlled by the common beliefs. And we kind of do self-censorship. We only restrict ourselves to behavior, and we try to change that. So if we don't address the cause of that behavior, we can never change the behavior as such. But I do understand we are guilty of being silent. So what we are suffering, we have been silent for long.
Again, I would give example, maybe it's not a good example. Forced marriage legislation,
Yeah.
we tried to raise awareness, educate people. We kept doing that for many, many years. But the community, it became such a big problem that the government had to intervene and bring in a legislation. And then I know legislation is not always the best way forward. But maybe, you know, in certain instances, you know, that's how you bring an attitudinal shift, then attitudinal change by legislation.
Yeah, but that is also, legislation may not change, but at least it's a declaration of intent of the state, that what the state is thinking. So that should be very loud and clear. But at the same time, as I mentioned, that the bigger responsibility lies with us. And people like Tamina and Anwar and others, they are doing their part, that they are trying to create that discourse, they are challenging some of the taken for granted truths and rights. So they are making that impact. And we should, where we feel that this is something wrong, we should challenge it.
Just to go back to Anila's point on the criminalisation of forced marriage, that was absolutely necessary because the civil law framework had completely failed on that point, and there'd been certain Home Office Select Committee reports which had said as much. Plus, forced marriage encompasses a whole range of offences which are in themselves criminal, such as rape and kidnap. But I think for the issue of niqab, I would be against a total ban, partly for the reason that it would marginalise the very women who already wear it. And secondly, I agree with Dr. Shah that we should raise our voices against the rhetoric that deems face covering to be compulsory within our communities. And it's something that needs to happen it needs to be much louder, and it needs to happen more frequently. And there is actually a book called Islam and the Veil, which has been compiled by Rabiha Hanan, and that contains a series of essays, lots of different perspectives on Muslim women's dress. And one of them is from Dr. Osama Hassan, and he's actually written an essay which says that even the hijab is not compulsory, let alone anything else. And this has been, I think, yes, it would be controversial in some sections of the community, but at the same time, it's a discussion that needs to be had. So we need to popularize books like this and opinions like Dr. Hassan's.
Just on a positive note, if I remember correctly, the proportionate increase in Chinese and Indian community is pretty much similar to the proportionate increase in the Pakistani community. So that should be a positive. So
we should celebrate the positive trends. It's just that since we are lagging behind so much, that when the core issues are something else, like the right to wear a veil or other things, that is the community core issue, and demonstrations are held for that and all. And these issues, they don't appear prominently in our discourse. That is what is a little bit alarming, that since we are already lagging behind, we should be really working hard. And then on top of that, when we have these faith school problems and recently the Trojan horse and other kind of issues, that instead of trying hard to bridge the gap with other communities, we are rather further creating an environment where we will lag behind.
The left is also a problem here, because ultra-left is, it's like a feminist saying, oh, my wife wants an abortion. Oh, no, she can't have an abortion.
Yes,
no, but, or she should have the right to abortion. But no, because my wife is expecting a baby girl. So, where do you draw the line? So it's tricky. We have a right to freedom.
And I was flicking through the channels, then I stopped at one, I can't remember which one was it. It's a UK-based Muslim channel. And somebody had phoned in to say that their health visitor had given them a music CD for the baby. And what does Islam say about music? So this person, the Maulana or whoever he was saying that it's haram, and do you want your child to grow up a Mirasi? I don't know what's the equivalent.
Is a connotation with that.
Yes, and Toba Astaghfirullah, and that kind of stuff. So as a health professional, then it's a constant struggle working with this group who thinks that music is haram, whereas there's plenty of evidence to suggest that music, dance, has a positive impact. It's good for bonding, mother-child bonding. It has positive impact on mental health, physical health.
Yes, that is an important issue. Perhaps, have you had any?
I've had experience of doing this actually, not so much on the Islamic channels, although I have been interviewed on them as well, but in mainstream channels. I think that's where we can put our arguments across more strongly. And a recent example is the Dispatches program on faith schools that I appeared on. And I was, bless you, thank you. I thought it was really important to oppose these draconian policies on music and clapping, and to do so in a very vocal way. And it generated a lot of support, although I had some negative feedback as well from the usual suspects, but that's to be expected. The more of us come out and give these issues a voice and raise our voice, the harder it will be for those on the other side to intimidate us. We have to build critical mass.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Good.
Well, I'm a big supporter of more standardized and quality training for imams, and the Cambridge Muslim College, I think, is an exemplar in that field. Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad or Dr. Tim Winter, he has put together a really good program for training imams, and includes not just the theological arguments, but about contextualizing Islam in Britain for the 21st century, pastoral elements, everything's put together in one package. So I'd like to see that that program rolled out to other sort of imam training colleges across the UK.
So thank you.
very much.
Thank you.